Floor, and you know what I'm talking about here on my channel right now. It's
Hi besties, I am Bashan Lashari with Corevanta. Today we should discuss about
The story of Blake Lively begins not under the dazzling lights of Hollywood, but under the weight of expectation and silent ambition. Born into a family already intertwined with the industry, Blake never had to find Hollywood. It was in her blood, in her environment, in the quiet whispers of her parents' dreams. Yet, behind that Californian sunshine smile and golden-haired innocence lay something far more calculated. An instinct for survival, a precision for image, and a hunger for control. The world remembers her as the effortlessly perfect Serena van der Woodsen. The girl every teenage dream revolved around. The one who made chaos look graceful. But what no one realized then was that Serena wasn't just a role, it was Blake's mirror. The line between performance and reality had blurred long ago. Hollywood saw a golden girl. But beneath that perfect exterior, Blake was building an empire of perception, one carefully controlled photograph, interview, and relationship at a time. When Gossip Girl exploded across the world, Blake Lively became the symbol of an era, an icon of luxury, mystery, and unattainable charm. She was the fantasy that magazines worshipped. Every red carpet appearance felt choreographed, every smile weaponized. While others were chasing fame, Blake was studying it, understanding its mechanics, its weaknesses. Behind her golden curls and charming tone, she learned how to manipulate press narratives and public sentiment, always staying 3 steps ahead of the media cycle. In Hollywood, power isn't just talent, it's perception. And no one mastered perception quite like Blake Lively. She knew when to play the victim, when to be the goddess, when to reinvent herself as the homemaker, the mother, the brand builder, or the mysterious artist's muse. By the time she met Ryan Reynolds, her transformation was nearly complete. The world saw the perfect couple, smiling, teasing, playful, effortlessly cool. Their chemistry became internet currency. Together they built a kingdom of public charm. A digital empire that sold a fantasy of love so flawless it blinded the truth. Yet behind those Instagram-perfect captions and red carpet glances, there was tension, unspoken power struggles wrapped in laughter, decisions disguised as jokes, and a calculated performance of togetherness. Ryan, the witty charmer with impeccable timing, became the face of their public humor. Blake, however, became the architect. She controlled what they shared, how they were seen. And when the narrative shifted, even in interviews, her laughter seemed timed to perfection, masking any real emotion with polished warmth. Hollywood insiders often whispered that Blake's true strength wasn't acting. It was image manipulation. Directors admired her composure, producers admired her control. She knew how to make people trust her, how to make them lower their guard. Friends came and went, allies turned silent. Yet Blake remained untouchable, wrapped in the illusion of authenticity. In the glossy world of celebrity culture, she understood that truth was irrelevant. What mattered was the story people chose to believe. And Blake Lively made sure she was always the author of her own legend. But then, like every empire built on perfection, cracks began to show. Beneath her curated charm, there were rumors of on-set tension, of private fallouts, of hidden feuds dressed in politeness. Blake had built a reputation as Hollywood's golden wife and mother. Yet her silence during key controversies began to look strategic, even manipulative. People began to question. How could someone so present be so absent when it mattered most? Her friendship with certain stars faded mysteriously, her collaborations shifted, and her tone grew colder. Blake wasn't just evolving. She was rewriting her character again, anticipating the storm before it arrived. And then came the turning point. The silent war no one was meant to see. The fallout between Blake and those she once called allies began to surface in whispers, leaks, and quiet statements masked as PR stunts. Sources began hinting at behind-the-scenes manipulation, strained relationships, and professional sabotage hidden behind Hollywood smiles. A pattern emerged. Anyone who threatened her control seemed to fade from relevance. Some called it coincidence. Others called it strategy. But deep down, everyone knew Blake Lively was not just surviving Hollywood. She was quietly orchestrating it. Her social media, once filled with warmth and family moments, began to look like a chessboard. Each post, each caption, each photo placement carried intention. When critics accused her of being distant, she posted a heartfelt tribute. When controversies surrounded her inner circle, she uploaded family photos, carefully cropped, perfectly timed. Every image was a weapon, every silence a message. Blake had learned to make the audience feel what she wanted them to feel. The illusion was airtight. Yet behind closed doors, tension brewed. Rumors of professional jealousy between her and younger actresses surfaced. Insiders spoke of creative control battles, ego clashes, and PR manipulation. Still, Blake never faltered publicly, because she knew the first rule of power in Hollywood: never bleed where cameras can see. The most haunting part of her story isn't her rise, it's how she maintained the illusion long enough to make even her critics question their perception. While others sought fame through noise, Blake mastered the art of silence. But silence, when held too long, becomes suspicious. The very tool that protected her for years was now turning against her. Her world, built on image, loyalty, and secrecy, was beginning to tremble. Not from an external scandal, but from the ghosts of her own design. As one insider whispered in a hushed interview, "She's not who you think she is. The Blake you see is a version she created for you. The real one is much more dangerous." And that's where the truth begins to unravel. The year everything began to crumble for Blake Lively didn't start with a scandal. It started with silence, the kind that only happens when something sacred begins to rot beneath the surface. Her world had been flawless for so long, wrapped in designer fabrics and curated affection, that even the slightest crack felt like an earthquake. But this time, the tremor came from within. The same machinery she had built to protect herself, the handlers, the strategists, the friendly media contacts, had begun to turn restless. Whispers of manipulation and control had grown louder, now finding their way into boardrooms, production meetings, and even private dinners. The air around Blake had changed. People began to glance at her not with admiration, but with suspicion, as though her charm had transformed from a weapon of allure into a warning. The Hollywood elite are good at pretending. They smile while they bleed. They laugh while they scheme. But Blake's performance had been so seamless for so long that few noticed the exhaustion hiding in her eyes. Fame had given her everything: money, status, power, but it had taken something even greater: truth. In the quiet moments between film sets and red carpets, she found herself trapped in a prison of her own making. Every word she spoke had been rehearsed, every emotion filtered through her brand. Even Ryan, the man she once called her partner in crime, had begun to drift, not in public, but in spirit. Their playful banter, once adored by millions, now felt rehearsed and brittle. And when cameras stopped rolling, the silence between them was deafening. The year everything began to crumble for Blake Lively didn't start with a scandal. It started with silence, the kind that only happens when something sacred begins to rot beneath the surface. Her world had been flawless for so long, wrapped in designer fabrics and curated affection, that even the slightest crack felt like an earthquake. But this time, the tremor came from within. The same machinery she had built to protect herself, the handlers, the strategists, the friendly media contacts, had begun to turn restless. Whispers of manipulation and control had grown louder, now finding their way into boardrooms, production meetings, and even private dinners. The air around Blake had changed. People began to glance at her not with admiration, but with suspicion, as though her charm had transformed from a weapon of allure into a warning. The Hollywood elite are good at pretending. They smile while they bleed. They laugh while they scheme. But Blake's performance had been so seamless for so long that few noticed the exhaustion hiding in her eyes. Fame had given her everything: money, status, power, but it had taken something even greater: truth. In the quiet moments between film sets and red carpets, she found herself trapped in a prison of her own making. Every word she spoke had been rehearsed, every emotion filtered through her brand. Even Ryan, the man she once called her partner in crime, had begun to drift, not in public, but in spirit. Their playful banter, once adored by millions, now felt rehearsed and brittle. And when cameras stopped rolling, the silence between them was deafening. In the world Blake ruled, relationships were assets, until they weren't. Her friendship circle had thinned, not by accident but by evolution. Taylor Swift, once her closest ally in the world of glitter and gossip, had become distant. Rumors of a quiet feud spread. Creative differences, personal boundaries, professional jealousy. No one knew the truth, because both women understood the value of mystery. But those who'd seen them together whispered about tension, about projects that went sour, about the kind of unspoken rivalry that only fame can breed. The world saw sisterhood. Behind the curtain, there was silence and strategy. Then came the headlines that Blake couldn't control. The kind that weren't supposed to exist in her carefully guarded universe. Allegations of professional manipulation. Crew members claiming she demanded creative authority on projects that weren't hers, and anonymous sources describing her as a perfectionist to the point of destruction. Each story was minor on its own, but together they began to form a shadow, a shape of something darker, something unfiltered. For the first time, Blake's image wasn't being shaped by her PR team. It was being sculpted by truth. What no one knew was that behind this public tension was a brewing storm involving one name that would change everything: Justin Baldoni. He was the kind of man Hollywood both feared and adored. Idealistic, spiritual, passionate, and unpredictable. When he entered Blake's professional orbit, sparks flew, not of romance, but of ideology. Their collaboration, once seen as the next big artistic alliance, became a battlefield of creative control. Blake, accustomed to being the quiet puppeteer, suddenly met someone who refused to be pulled by strings. What started as mutual respect turned into rivalry. Meetings turned into confrontations. And what the public thought was creative passion was, behind closed doors, a war for dominance. Justin saw through the mask. He wasn't charmed by the curated perfection or the golden image. He was intrigued by what she was hiding. For a woman who had mastered control, this was her worst nightmare. A man who couldn't be controlled. Their partnership imploded. Rumors of sabotage followed, leaked scripts, legal threats, and silent PR warfare. Blake's world of immaculate order began to crumble as lawsuits, NDAs, and whispered testimonies began to surface. Insiders claimed she had used her influence to bury projects that might have damaged her image, that she had crossed lines between professionalism and manipulation. Blake denied it all, maintaining her perfect smile, but those who'd once defended her began stepping back. Hollywood has no mercy for the fallen, especially when it smells fear. The deeper the world looked, the more contradictions they found. The once beloved star now seemed to carry two faces, the angel of the red carpet and the strategist behind the scenes. Her name, once synonymous with grace, became entangled in speculation. Was Blake Lively truly a victim of media distortion? Or had she been its greatest architect all along? Even her marriage, once considered Hollywood's most unshakable, began showing signs of fracture. Ryan Reynolds, with his growing empire of humor and business ventures, seemed to be stepping into a light Blake once controlled. His jokes about marriage, once endearing, now felt like subtle digs wrapped in charm. Their coordinated appearances grew less frequent, trending for all the wrong reasons. The world turned its gaze toward her, waiting for the response, but Blake remained silent. For days, then weeks. That silence, once her greatest weapon, now felt like guilt. The empire she had built through precision and performance was shaking, and for the first time, she couldn't control the narrative. People wanted accountability, not a smile. They wanted truth, not another photo shoot. Her fans defended her, but even their loyalty wavered under the weight of evidence. Behind closed doors, Blake was said to be furious. Not because of the exposure itself, but because the betrayal had come from within, from people she trusted. Sources claimed the leaks came from former collaborators and associates who had grown tired of her dominance. Some even said the rift between Blake and Justin Baldoni had reached a legal boiling point, with confidential agreements being tested and broken. For Blake, it was more than a professional wound. It was a personal humiliation. She had built her world to be unshakable, but she'd underestimated how quickly loyalty can turn into vengeance in Hollywood's unforgiving arena. The press feasted on every headline. Old interviews were dissected, body language analyzed, friendships compared. Blake's once adored charisma was being reframed as arrogance, her confidence as manipulation. In the echo chamber of digital outrage, perception is truth, and Blake was losing control of both. The empire she'd crafted with elegance and precision was now being rewritten by the very machine she'd once mastered. Yet beneath the chaos, something remarkable happened. For the first time, Blake stopped performing. Away from cameras, away from control, she began confronting the cracks she had long ignored. Friends said she grew quiet, withdrawn, almost haunted. Her perfection had cost her peace. Her control had cost her authenticity. And as her name continued to headline scandal columns, she faced the one question she avoided her whole career. Who was she, when the act ended? The Hollywood queen who once orchestrated narratives was now at the mercy of one. The image that once protected her had become a cage. Every lie, every silence, every polished smile had led to this moment. The unraveling of a woman who had mistaken control for security and performance for identity. The cameras still followed her, but their tone had changed. No longer adoring, they were investigative. The same lenses that once captured her beauty were now searching for guilt. Every step, every glance, every gesture was dissected for signs of remorse or deception. And Blake, who once dictated how the world saw her, could now only watch as her story was told without her permission. Hollywood had turned the page. But for Blake Lively, the story was far from over. Because if there's one thing more dangerous than a woman with power, it's a woman who's lost everything and still refuses to surrender. The fall of a Hollywood queen doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in waves. For Blake Lively, those waves came quietly at first, washing away the fragments of her once perfect empire. Every endorsement, every film rumor, every article about her comeback carried a shadow. It wasn't just the scandal anymore. It was the doubt. The same industry that once worshipped her elegance now questioned her sincerity. The same journalists who praised her motherhood now analyzed her silence as strategy. And the same fans who adored her turned skeptical, scrolling through old interviews like detectives searching for signs of the lies they'd missed. In the months that followed the leaks and allegations, Blake retreated. Not in a dramatic public meltdown, but in the only way she knew how, silently. No statements, no interviews, no tearful apologies. Just absence. Hollywood began to move on, as it always does, but her name lingered like perfume in a closed room. Invisible but impossible to forget. The mystery of Blake Lively had become the story itself. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Would she fight back, or would she disappear into the quiet luxury she had so carefully crafted? Behind the curtain, though, something was shifting. Sources close to her spoke of isolation. Of a woman stripped of the illusions she had once weaponized. The laughter that used to fill her sets was gone, replaced by silence and late-night phone calls to her shrinking circle of confidants. Ryan Reynolds, once her greatest ally, had grown distant beyond repair. Their marriage, held together for years by performance and presentation, now existed more as a memory than a reality. The playful teasing, the coordinated appearances, the cinematic smiles, all gone. What remained were two people bound by history but divided by truth. Blake, for the first time, faced life without the script she had written for herself. Her reputation had been her crown, and now it was her chain. In the privacy of her home, she began to question everything. Her choices, her friends, even her reflection. The mirror no longer showed her the perfect star she had built. It showed a woman exhausted by her own design. And somewhere in that fatigue, the mask began to slip. The Blake Lively the world never saw, raw, angry, afraid, began to emerge. Those who managed to speak to her during that time described her not as defeated, but as calculating again, quieter, more dangerous. Because Blake Lively's silence was never surrender. It was strategy. The first sign of her return came unexpectedly, a leaked image. A candid moment of her walking through New York, no makeup, no designer dress, no bodyguard. The photo went viral, not for glamour but for honesty. Blake looks human, one headline said. The fall of a goddess, another wrote. But the attention reignited something in her. The reminder that even in chaos, she still commanded the world's gaze. Within weeks she resurfaced, not with a denial or an explanation, but with a project. A charity collaboration focusing on mental health and online toxicity, framed around forgiveness and truth. It was a masterstroke of narrative control. Her critics called it opportunistic, Her fans called it redemption. Blake called it survival. The campaign's tone was almost poetic, a woman reclaiming her story, framed not as a victim or villain, but as a misunderstood figure rising above scandal. Her speeches were delicate, her interviews controlled yet vulnerable. She spoke about pressure, about how perfection is a performance that kills empathy. It was the first time she had ever allowed cracks to show, and ironically, it made her more compelling than ever. Hollywood loves a comeback story, and Blake knew it. But even as her public image began to heal, those who'd once worked with her remained cautious. The wounds in the industry hadn't fully closed. Justin Baldoni's camp stayed quiet, but insiders hinted that the legal storm had settled, privately, expensively, and without apology. Whatever deal had been struck, it ensured silence. Still, whispers lingered. They always do. Some said Blake had orchestrated even her redemption, that her newfound vulnerability was just another role, the final evolution of her control. Others believed the opposite, that after years of manipulation, she had finally learned to be human again. The truth, as always in Hollywood, was likely somewhere in between. Then came the documentary. Streaming platforms circled her story like vultures, each offering millions for her exclusive truth. At first she refused. She didn't want her life to be dissected by strangers. But then came the offer she couldn't ignore, a deal that promised full creative control. The irony was poetic. Blake Lively, accused for years of controlling narratives, was now being paid to tell her own. The project was titled Unfiltered. When it finally premiered, the world held its breath. Blake appeared on screen, stripped down, raw lighting, no makeup, her voice calm but weary. She didn't deny the rumors outright, nor did she confess. Instead, she told stories about growing up in a world where image was everything, about losing herself in roles, about becoming addicted to approval. She didn't ask for sympathy. She demanded understanding. The film wasn't an apology, it was a revelation. And for the first time in years, the world saw not the actress, not the wife, not the brand, but the woman. Critics called it manipulative genius. Fans called it brave. The truth, perhaps, was both. Because even in vulnerability, Blake Lively remained the director of her own story. She had turned her downfall into art, her scandal into spectacle. And just like that, the world forgave her. The same machine that destroyed her rebuilt her, one headline at a time. But redemption in Hollywood is never free. It demands something, authenticity, humility, or sacrifice. For Blake, it meant letting go of the parts of herself that could no longer survive under scrutiny. She stopped pretending to be perfect. She stopped fighting every rumor. And in that surrender, she found a strange kind of freedom. The woman who once feared losing control had learned that sometimes, losing it was the only way to start again. Still, the shadows never truly disappeared. The ghosts of her past, the feuds, the manipulations, the betrayals, continued to follow her, reappearing whenever the spotlight found her face. Hollywood never forgets. It only pauses. And though Blake had regained much of her power, it wasn't the same kind of power she once held. It was quieter, humbler, but infinitely more dangerous, because now it came with self-awareness. Years later, when asked in a rare interview if she regretted anything, Blake smiled faintly. "Regret?" she said. "No. But I do wish I'd been honest sooner, with others and with myself." You spend your life performing for approval, and then one day you realize the audience was never real. The only person watching you was you. That quote went viral. It was framed as wisdom, but to those who knew her story, it was something else entirely, a confession. Because beneath all the glamour, the power, and the silence, Blake Lively had finally admitted the truth that Hollywood never wanted to hear. That the Golden Girl was never golden. She was simply human, wearing gold-plated armor that had finally begun to rust. In the end, her empire didn't collapse, it transformed. She became more elusive, more selective, retreating from the chaos she once ruled. Projects came and went, but the myth remained. Blake Lively was no longer the woman Hollywood made her. She was the woman who survived it. And in that survival, there was a new kind of power, one that came not from manipulation, but from endurance. Some say redemption in Hollywood is a myth, that no one truly escapes their past. But Blake did what she always did best. She turned it into a story worth watching. Because for all her flaws, all her control, and all her missteps, Blake Lively understood something fundamental about fame. That the truth doesn't matter if you can make people feel something. And as the credits rolled on her own life's chaos, she stood, not as the perfect woman the world once adored, nor as the villain it tried to destroy, but as something far more dangerous, far more real. A woman who finally stopped pretending. Her eyes still carried that old glimmer, part sadness, part satisfaction, the look of someone who had lost everything and, in the ashes, found freedom. The audience that once worshipped her perfection now worshipped her imperfection. And Blake, the actress who had played everyone from a socialite to a survivor, had finally found the one role that wasn't written for her, herself. Because in the end, Hollywood didn't bury her truth. It revealed it.